The Galactic Archive station floated in the middle of nowhere, holding the most valuable treasures from 1,000 different worlds. Inside its massive walls were things so ancient and precious that entire wars had been fought just to protect them. The station itself was a fortress, with shields that could withstand planet-destroying weapons and security systems designed by the smartest minds in the galaxy. And Bob Henderson cleaned the bathrooms there. Every morning at 5 a.m. station time, Bob would wheel his cleaning cart through the gleaming corridors, past guards who could lift cars with their bare hands, past scientists who could calculate the trajectory of a comet in their heads, past diplomats who negotiated treaties between species that humans had never even heard of. They all saw him the same way. Just the janitor. Just the human. Bob had been working there for 3 years now, and the novelty of having a human on staff still hadn't worn off. The alien workers found him endlessly entertaining, like having a talking dog that could operate a mop bucket. Humans were the new kids in the galactic neighborhood, barely a century into their membership in the wider community. Earth was still figuring out faster-than-light travel while other species had been cruising the stars for millions of years. The thing is, humans didn't bring much to the table. The sentinels who guarded the archive were massive warriors from a dozen different species. Some could read minds and coordinate attacks telepathically. Others had skin like tank armor that could stop bullets without a scratch. A few could see in dimensions that humans didn't even have words for. They were the elite, the best of the best, chosen from populations of trillions. And then there was Bob, with his mop and his bucket and his chronic lower back pain. The guards liked to joke about him in the break room. They'd share stories about the funny human and his weird habits. How he always brought something called a thermos filled with coffee, because apparently humans needed to drink bitterbean water to function properly. How he whistled these strange tunes from Earth that sounded like dying space whales. How he'd actually tried to make small talk with Commander Riley, a stone-faced warrior from the Century system who could crush steel with her thoughts, asking her if she'd had a nice weekend. Bob didn't mind the jokes. He'd learned early on that getting offended wouldn't change anything. Besides, the paycheck was incredible by Earth standards. His daughter Katie was in her second year at university back home, studying to be a doctor, and his salary covered her tuition with enough left over to help his elderly mother with her medical bills. That's all that mattered. He could handle being the station's favorite comedy act if it meant his family was taken care of. He'd developed a routine. Clean the common areas first, then the barracks, then the laboratories, then the administrative offices. He knew every corner of this station, every corridor, every room. He knew that the air recyclers in Section 4 made a clicking sound that meant they needed maintenance soon. He knew that the automatic doors in the east wing stuck when the humidity went above 60%. He knew which tiles in the main hall were slightly uneven and needed replacing. Nobody else noticed these things, but Bob did. That's what good janitors do. They see the little stuff that keeps everything running. The sentinels tolerated him with bemused patience, the way you'd tolerate a child's pet hamster. They'd nod at him in the hallways. Some of the nicer ones even learned his name instead of just calling him the human. Bob would ask them about their days, genuinely curious about their lives. Most would give short answers and move on, but occasionally someone would actually talk to him. He'd learned that Lieutenant Grant from the Vega colonies missed his home planet's purple sunsets. That Sergeant Murphy, who had scales instead of skin, was allergic to synthetic fabrics. That Captain Davis got homesick during their lunar festivals. Small things. Human things, even if they weren't all human. Then came the announcement that changed everything. The Grand Curator, a dignified alien named Theodore who took his job very seriously, called a station-wide meeting. There would be a Millennium Coronation ceremony, something that only happened once every 1,000 years. Representatives from every member world in the galaxy would come to the station to view the Crown Vault, a chamber that held 27 crowns from the ancient progenitor civilization. Bob had heard about the progenitors in the station's orientation videos. They were the mysterious precursor race that had supposedly ruled the galaxy millions of years ago, building impossible technology and vanishing without a trace. The crowns in the vault were some of the only things they'd left behind. According to legend, these crowns could recognize true authority and would choose worthy leaders, though nobody really believed that anymore. They were museum pieces, relics of a mythical past that probably never existed the way the stories claimed. The ceremony would be the biggest event in the station's history. Dignitaries, warriors, scholars, and politicians from hundreds of worlds would attend. Security would be tripled. The station would be inspected from top to bottom, which meant someone needed to make it spotlessly clean. Bob got called into Curator Theodore's office on a Tuesday afternoon. He stood there in his janitor's jumpsuit, holding his cap in his hands, while the curator explained that he'd been selected for a special assignment. The crown vault needed to be prepared for the ceremony. The floors needed to be polished. The display cases needed to be cleaned. Everything needed to be absolutely perfect. It was, Theodore explained with complete sincerity, the greatest honor they could give him. A chance to serve at the highest level. Bob would be the first person to enter the vault in over 50 years. Bob thanked him, shook his hand, and left the office with his assignment sheet. Outside in the hallway, he could hear two sentinels laughing about letting the human into the most sacred vault in the galaxy. One of them made a joke about hoping he didn't break anything priceless. Bob just smiled and went to get his heavy-duty floor polisher. He had work to do. At 4 in the morning on the day before the ceremony, Bob Henderson pushed his cleaning cart into the crown vault, turned on the lights, and got to work. Behind him, on their pedestals in perfect rows, 27 ancient crowns sat in darkness. And for the first time in 10,000 years, they started to wake up. The ceremony started at noon, and by 11:45, the observation gallery was packed with the most important people in the galaxy. Ambassadors in elaborate robes. Military commanders with chests full of medals. Scientists clutching data pads. Everyone who was anyone had shown up to witness the viewing of the progenitor crowns. Bob watched from the back corridor, staying out of sight like he'd been instructed. He'd done his job well. The vault floor gleamed like a mirror. Every display case was spotless. The pedestals holding the crowns were dust-free and positioned perfectly. He'd even cleaned the air vents, though nobody would probably notice that. The vault itself was enormous, with a domed ceiling that reached up 50 feet. The walls were made of some material that shimmered between silver and gold, covered in symbols that nobody could read anymore. The 27 crowns sat on raised platforms arranged in a circle, each one different. Some were simple metal bands. Others were elaborate constructions of precious stones and metals that seemed to defy gravity. One looked like it was made of solid light. Another appeared to be carved from a single piece of black crystal that absorbed all the light around it. Curator Theodore gave a speech about history and significance and the honor of standing in the presence of such ancient artifacts. Bob only half listened. He was mentally going through his checklist, making sure he hadn't forgotten anything. Then the actual viewing began. Ambassador Clark from the VRYNN Empire went first. The VRYNN were telepathic, one of the most powerful species in the galaxy, and Clark carried himself like he knew it. He'd probably been practicing this moment in front of a mirror. He walked slowly toward the largest crown, the stellar diadem, which sat on a pedestal in the center of the circle. According to the legends, this was the crown that the progenitor emperor himself had worn. Clark reached out with one hand, his face serious and dignified. Everyone held their breath. This was it. The moment when the ancient magic would recognize a worthy leader and the crowns would choose someone for the first time in recorded history. Nothing happened. Clark stood there for a solid minute, hand extended, waiting. The crown just sat there. It didn't glow. It didn't move. It didn't do anything except exist. Eventually, Clark lowered his hand and stepped back, trying to look like he'd expected this result all along. A few people in the audience coughed politely. Next came Ambassador Wilson, representing the Andromeda Coalition. Same result. Then General Peterson from the United Stellar Command. Then High Scholar Mitchell from the Academic Worlds. One by one, representatives from the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy approached various crowns, and one by one, absolutely nothing happened. The mood in the room shifted from anticipation to awkwardness. People started checking their watches. Someone's communicator went off, and they scrambled to silence it. Curator Theodore was sweating, trying to maintain his professional composure while his life's work apparently turned out to be a room full of fancy jewelry with no magical properties whatsoever. Bob felt bad for the guy. He knew what it was like when something you'd worked hard on didn't go according to plan. He decided to slip out quietly and get back to work. He still had the East Wing bathrooms to clean before his shift ended. He pushed open the service door as quietly as possible and stepped into the vault, heading toward where he'd left his cleaning cart in the corner. He'd grab it quick and disappear before anyone noticed him. Just another invisible janitor doing his job. That's when it happened. The stellar diadem started glowing. Not a soft glow. A blazing, golden light that filled the entire vault like someone had brought a piece of the sun inside. Then the crown of infinite night lit up, but with darkness somehow, a black radiance that seemed impossible. Then the phoenix circlet erupted in flames that didn't burn. Then another crown, and another, and another. Within 5 seconds, all 27 crowns were blazing with power. The walls shook. The air hummed with energy that made everyone's teeth ache. Warning alarms started going off throughout the station. The shields flickered as massive amounts of power surged through systems that hadn't been active in millennia. And every single crown rose slowly off its pedestal and turned to point directly at Bob. Bob froze. His cleaning cart was still in his hands. His mouth hung open. His brain completely shut down because there was absolutely no training, no experience, no amount of preparation that could help someone process the moment when every ancient artifact in the room suddenly decided you were the most interesting person in existence. The sentinels reacted instantly. Weapons came out. Energy barriers formed. Commander Riley moved to put herself between Bob and the crowns, her combat instincts taking over even though she had no idea what she was protecting him from or why. Ambassador Clark's telepathic scream of confusion hit everyone in the room like a slap. Half the dignitaries fell to their knees. Someone fainted. Curator Theodore made a sound like a balloon deflating. Bob dropped his cleaning cart. Bottles of floor cleaner rolled across the polished surface he'd worked so hard on. A mop clattered against a display case. I didn't touch anything. His voice came out too high and panicked. I swear, I was just getting my cart, I didn't go near them, I didn't. The stellar diadem moved. It floated through the air with the kind of inevitability you see in dreams, when you know something's going to happen and you can't stop it. Bob backed up, hands raised like he was being robbed. His heel caught on the fallen mop handle and he stumbled, crashing into his cleaning cart, which tipped over with a spectacular crash. Industrial strength cleaner splashed across the floor. Scrub brushes scattered everywhere. Bob landed hard on his backside in a puddle of soapy water. The crown didn't care. It continued forward, serene and unstoppable, like a planet in orbit. Bob scrambled backward on his hands, but there was nowhere to go. The crown reached him and gently, almost tenderly, settled onto his head. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Every screen in the vault, every monitor, every display surface suddenly showed the same message in every known language: Sovereign recognized. Imperial authority confirmed. Progenitor lineage verified. The other 26 crowns arranged themselves in a protective orbit around Bob, spinning slowly, humming with power that made the station's reactor look like a flashlight. They moved like they were alive, like they were intelligent, like they'd been waiting for this exact moment for thousands and thousands of years. Bob sat in a puddle of mop water, wearing a priceless artifact on his head, surrounded by flying magical crowns, while the most important people in the galaxy stared at him in absolute silence. Then Commander Riley did something that would be talked about for generations. This warrior, this woman who'd fought in 100 battles, who'd never bowed to anyone, who represented the finest military tradition in the galaxy, dropped to one knee. Her warriors followed. Then the scientists. Then, slowly, one by one, every single person in that vault knelt before Bob Henderson, Janitor, who was still sitting in cleaning solution and desperately wishing he could disappear. They moved Bob to a conference room within 20 minutes, though calling it a conference room was like calling a stadium a garage. The place was huge, with a table that could seat 50 people and walls made of some transparent material that showed the stars outside. Bob sat in a chair designed for someone twice his size, his feet barely touching the floor. The stellar diadem still sat on his head because when he tried to take it off, it wouldn't budge. It wasn't hurting him or anything, just refused to move. 3 other crowns hovered near his shoulders like bodyguards. The emergency council filled the room fast. Military commanders. Government officials. Scientists carrying equipment that beeped and hummed. Everyone talked at once, voices overlapping in a dozen different languages. Bob caught fragments of conversations. Words like protocol and genetic marker and constitutional crisis kept popping up. Nobody seemed to know what to do, which made sense because this exact situation probably wasn't covered in anyone's training manual. Dr. Patricia Morris pushed through the crowd with her scanning equipment. She was human, one of the few Earth scientists working at the station, and she'd always been nice to Bob in the hallways. Right now she looked like someone had just told her the sky was actually purple and gravity was a suggestion. I need to run some tests, she said, not really asking permission. She held up a device that looked like a flashlight had a baby with a calculator. This won't hurt. Bob nodded. The scanner hummed as she waved it around him, and her expression got more confused with every passing second. She ran the scan 3 times, checked her equipment, recalibrated everything, and ran it again. This is impossible, she muttered, pulling up results on her datapad. This can't be right. Curator Theodore leaned over her shoulder. What is it? His DNA. It's got markers I've only seen in one other place. She looked up at Bob with wide eyes. Progenitor ruins. Trace genetic material we found at dig sites across the galaxy. But those samples are millions of years old. They shouldn't match anyone alive today. They definitely shouldn't match a human. The room went quiet. Everyone stared at Bob, who shifted uncomfortably in his too big chair. Ambassador Clark spoke up, his voice dripping with skepticism. That's ridiculous. Humans appeared 40,000 years ago. We have records. Earth was surveyed. The progenitors vanished 2 million years ago. There's no connection. There can't be. The scans don't lie, Dr. Morris shot back. These aren't similar markers. They're identical. Exact matches. The same sequences we find in progenitor technology, in their buildings, in everything they left behind. But how? Someone asked. Bob raised his hand like he was in school. Everyone looked at him. Maybe Earth was a colony that got forgotten? Like, they went there, settled down, and then everyone else lost track of them? It happens in movies all the time. The silence that followed was painful. Several aliens exchanged glances that clearly said they thought Bob had lost his mind. Ambassador Clark actually laughed, a sharp bark of disbelief. If humans were descended from progenitors, you'd have their technology, their power, their advanced capabilities. You'd be able to survive anything, Dr. Morris interrupted quietly. She'd pulled up Earth's file on her pad and was reading it with new eyes. Oh my God. What? Commander Riley asked. Earth's classification. It's listed as a Class 12 death world. That's the highest danger rating we have. She started reading out loud. Extreme temperature variations. Hyper-aggressive microorganisms. Atmospheric oxygen levels that are toxic to most species. Tectonic instability. Severe weather patterns. Apex predators that use persistence hunting. Poisonous flora that the native species consumes recreationally. She looked up at Bob. You eat food that's poisonous. For fun. Because you think it tastes good. Well, I mean, jalapenos aren't really poisonous, Bob said. They're just spicy. They contain capsaicin, which is literally a neurotoxin designed to stop mammals from eating the plant. You've bred them to be more toxic because the mild ones aren't interesting enough. Dr. Morris scrolled through more data. Your planet has parasites that eat brain tissue. Viruses that liquefy organs. Bacteria that can kill in hours. And humans survived there. Thrived there. Became the dominant species. She turned to address the room. The progenitors were legendary for their resilience. Every record we have talks about how they could adapt to any environment, survive any threat, overcome any challenge. We always thought it was mythology, exaggeration. But what if it wasn't? What if they deliberately chose the harshest planet they could find and started over? General Peterson, a massive alien covered in what looked like natural armor plating, shook his head. Why would anyone do that? Why give up an empire to live on a death world? Maybe that was the point, Bob said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him again. He felt his face get hot but kept talking. Maybe they got tired of being powerful. Maybe all the technology and empire stuff made them soft, and they wanted their kids to be strong without needing any of that. So they found the hardest place they could and started from scratch. The room stayed quiet. Bob could tell some people thought he was crazy, but others looked thoughtful. Dr. Morris was nodding slowly. It would explain the timeline, she said. Progenitors vanished 2 million years ago. Modern humans appear 40,000 years ago. What if there were earlier versions that didn't make it? Failed attempts at adaptation? Earth would have killed off any population that couldn't evolve fast enough. Only the strongest, most adaptable survivors would pass on their genes. That's quite a theory, Ambassador Clark said coldly. But theories don't. The station shuddered. Hard. Coffee cups slid across the table. Someone grabbed the wall for balance. The lights flickered, and alarm klaxons started blaring throughout the facility. Every crown around Bob flared with brilliant light, pulsing in a pattern that felt like a warning. Commander Riley was already moving, her hand going to her communicator. Report. A voice crackled through, barely audible over the alarms. Commander, we have a contact at the system's edge. It just appeared out of nowhere. Massive energy signature. The computer identifies it as a Harvester-class extinction vessel. The room erupted in panic. People started shouting. Someone dropped their data pad, and it shattered on the floor. Dr. Morris grabbed Bob's arm hard enough to hurt. Those are myth, General Peterson said, but his voice shook. They were all destroyed in the progenitor wars. Apparently not, Commander Riley said grimly. She pulled up a tactical display, and everyone crowded around to look. The ship on the screen was huge, easily 5 times the size of the station, and shaped like something that was designed to kill planets. Its hull was covered in weapon ports. What does it want? Curator Theodore asked, though his voice suggested he already knew the answer. The communication system crackled. A voice came through, mechanical and cold, speaking in a language that the translation system struggled with. When it finally rendered into something understandable, the words made Bob's blood run cold. Progenitor genetic signature detected. Continuation of bloodline is forbidden. Initiating sterilization protocol. All life in this system will be terminated to ensure complete extinction of the progenitor line. The AI had been waiting. For millions of years, it had been waiting, programmed by whoever won the ancient war to make sure the progenitors never came back. And now it had found Bob. The crowns spun faster, their light intensifying. Bob stood up slowly, and something in his chest felt different. Like a door opening. Like remembering something he'd never actually learned. "How long do we have?" he asked. Commander Riley checked her display. 17 minutes before it's in firing range. Our shields might hold for 5 minutes after that. Maybe. Bob looked at the stellar diadem's reflection in the window. At the other crowns hovering protectively around him. At all these people who'd knelt before him an hour ago. "Get me to the command center," he said. His voice came out different. Steadier. Like he suddenly knew exactly what he was doing. "I think I know how to fix this." The command center was chaos. Officers shouted coordinates and tactical assessments while screens showed the harvester getting closer. The ancient warship moved through space like it owned the place, completely ignoring the distress signals the station kept sending. Bob stood in the middle of it all, still wearing his janitor's jumpsuit under the glowing crown, trying not to get in anyone's way. Station Commander Harris, a gray-haired woman who'd been running military operations for 30 years, barked orders at her crew. "Divert all available power to forward shields. Get our civilians to the evacuation shuttles. Contact the nearest military outpost and tell them we need reinforcements yesterday." "Reinforcements are 4 hours out," someone called back. "We've got maybe 20 minutes. Our weapons aren't designed for this," another officer added, his voice cracking slightly. "That thing has armor plating that could shrug off a nuclear blast. We're essentially shooting it with pellet guns." Bob watched the tactical displays, his eyes moving from screen to screen. He wasn't looking at the big picture like the military people. He was looking at details. Power flow patterns. Shield configurations. Weapon charge cycles. The way energy moved through the station's systems. It reminded him of something, though he couldn't quite place what. Ambassador Clark had followed them to the command center, along with Dr. Morris and about a dozen other officials. Clark was still pushing his agenda. "We should surrender the human. Negotiate. Maybe it'll leave the rest of us alone." Commander Riley stepped in front of Bob, her hand on her weapon. "That's not happening. We're talking about millions of lives versus one janitor," Clark pressed. "The math is simple." "The math is stupid," Bob said, not looking away from the screens. Everyone turned to stare at him. "That ship isn't here to negotiate. Its programming is older than most civilizations in this room. It's not going to stop just because you give it what it wants. It said sterilization protocol. That means everyone." Dr. Morris nodded. "He's right. These harvesters were designed to eliminate entire star systems. They don't take prisoners. They don't leave witnesses." The station shuddered again as the harvester fired a warning shot that splashed against their shields. The lights dimmed momentarily before backup power kicked in. 14 minutes until it was in optimal firing range. After that, the station had maybe 5 minutes before the shields failed completely. Bob kept staring at the displays. Something was nagging at him, a feeling like when you can't remember where you left your keys but you know you've seen them recently. The way the power grid was laid out. The pattern of the shield emitters. The positioning of the defensive systems. It all felt familiar, like walking into a house you'd lived in as a kid. "Could someone bring up the tactical interface?" he asked. Commander Harris glanced at him, then at Commander Riley, who nodded. "Do it," Harris said. A holographic control panel materialized in front of Bob. It was covered in symbols and readouts that he absolutely should not understand. Station defense systems weren't exactly covered in janitor training. But as he looked at it, the symbols started making sense. Not because he was reading them, but because he somehow knew what they meant. Like reading music when you've never studied it but you've heard the song 1,000 times. His hand reached out tentatively and touched one of the controls. The entire interface lit up and reconfigured itself. Symbols rearranged. New options appeared. System readouts that had been buried in submenus suddenly became accessible. The crowns around Bob's head pulsed with light, and every system in the command center recognized his authority. "What the hell?" Commander Harris whispered. Bob's fingers moved across the holographic controls, and he wasn't entirely sure why. It just felt right. The station's shields were configured all wrong, spread too thin, trying to protect everything equally. He collapsed the rear shields entirely and reinforced the forward arc with the excess power. The shield formation changed into something nobody had seen before, layers that overlapped and reinforced each other like scales on a fish. "Henderson, what are you doing?" General Peterson demanded. "You just left our entire aft section exposed." "It's not coming from behind," Bob said absently, already working on the next system. The weapon batteries were charging independently, each one on its own cycle. He synchronized them, creating a pattern where they'd all reach peak charge at the exact same moment. "We only get one good shot. Might as well make it count." He found subsystems that didn't appear in any manual. Weapons that had been dormant so long everyone had forgotten they existed. Power conduits that could handle triple their rated capacity if you knew which safeties to disable. The station's reactor core, which always ran at 40% for safety reasons, suddenly surged to full power without any instability. "That's impossible," the chief engineer sputtered. "The containment field can't handle that output. We should be having a meltdown right now." "The containment field is rated for twice this," Bob said. "You just had the wrong governor installed. Someone put in a safety limiter that was too conservative." "How do you know that?" Bob looked up from the controls, and for a second his eyes seemed distant. "Because my ancestors built this stuff. And we never forget how to fix what we make." The harvester opened fire with its main weapons. Planet-killing energy beams that could crack a world's crust like an eggshell. They hit Bob's reconfigured shields and stopped dead. The entire station shook from the impact, but the shields held firm. They didn't just absorb the energy. They distributed it, dispersed it, turned a focused blast into scattered radiation that harmlessly dissipated into space. The harvester's AI must have experienced something like surprise. It fired again, different weapons this time. Antimatter torpedoes that could punch through anything. Bob's fingers danced across the controls, and the shields reconfigured in real time, changing their frequency, their density, their very nature to counter each attack. It was like watching someone play a musical instrument, each movement precise and purposeful. "That's not possible," Commander Harris said, but she was smiling now. "Those shields shouldn't be able to adapt that fast." "They can if you ask them nicely," Bob muttered. He was seeing things in the systems that nobody else could. Vulnerabilities in the harvester's design. It was old, ancient even, but it followed patterns. Every attack came from specific weapon ports. Every system had a rhythm. And Bob had spent 3 years cleaning this station, watching systems, learning patterns, understanding how things worked by watching how they broke. The harvester repositioned itself, trying to find an angle where the shields were weaker. Bob matched it move for move, always keeping the strongest shields between the station and the incoming fire. He found a frequency variance in the harvester's own shields, a tiny fluctuation that happened every 17 seconds when its weapons cycled. "There," he said, highlighting a point on the tactical display. "That's where we hit it." "That's its most heavily armored section," General Peterson objected. "It's also where all its power conduits meet. Hit it there during the shield fluctuation, and we can use its own energy against it." Bob's hands moved again, reprogramming the station's weapons to fire in a specific sequence. Janitor trick. Sometimes the best way to deal with a problem is to make it take itself out. Commander Harris looked at her tactical officer, who was frantically checking Bob's calculations. The officer nodded slowly. "It could work. It's crazy, but it could work." 15 seconds to optimal firing position, someone called out. Bob watched the countdown, his finger hovering over the firing control. The harvester unleashed everything it had, trying to overwhelm the shields through sheer firepower. Energy weapons, missiles, particle beams, things that didn't have names in any current language. The station groaned under the assault, hull plates buckling, secondary systems failing. The shields held. The fluctuation happened. That 17-second window where the harvester's defenses weren't quite synchronized. Bob pressed the button. Every weapon the station had fired at once, perfectly coordinated, hitting the exact same spot. The synchronized beams punched through the fluctuating shields and struck the harvester's power junction. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ancient warship's own energy grid overloaded, chain reactions cascading through systems that had operated for millions of years. The harvester didn't explode dramatically. It just stopped working, dead in space, its power core scattered into component atoms. The command center erupted in cheers. People hugged each other. Someone started crying. Commander Harris slumped in her chair, looking like she'd aged 10 years in the last 20 minutes. Bob stepped back from the controls, his hands shaking. The crown's glow faded to a soft pulse. What just happened? Ambassador Clark whispered. Dr. Morris was checking her scanners, her expression awed. He fought like he knew that ship. Like he'd seen the blueprints. I didn't know anything, Bob said quietly. I just saw the pattern. Saw where it was vulnerable. He looked at his hands like they belonged to someone else. It's what janitors do. We fix problems. 3 days after the Harvester incident, the Galactic Council convened an emergency session. Bob had never seen so many important people in one place. The council chamber was massive, with seats arranged in circular tiers that rose up like an amphitheater. Representatives from 200 member species filled the room, and every single one of them was there to talk about him. Bob sat in what was supposed to be the defendant's chair, though calling him a defendant didn't feel quite right. The chair was positioned at the center of the chamber floor, visible to everyone. It had been a fancy throne-like seat when he'd first arrived, but the crowns had apparently taken offense to the other furniture. They disintegrated every other chair in a 50-foot radius with some kind of energy pulse, leaving Bob sitting alone in a circle of empty floor. The message was pretty clear. Nobody sits higher than the one we chose. The stellar diadem still rested on Bob's head. He tried everything to remove it. Pulling, twisting, even asking it politely to please come off. Nothing worked. 3 other crowns orbited him slowly, and the remaining 23 hovered in a protective formation around the chamber's perimeter. Security had tried to remove them before the session started. The crowns had simply refused to move, and after one guard got knocked across the room by a shield pulse, everyone decided to just work around them. Bob wore his best clothes, which meant the one suit he owned that he'd bought for his daughter Katie's high school graduation. It was slightly too tight around the middle and the pants were a bit short, but it was better than showing up in his janitor uniform. Though honestly, at this point, what did it matter? The council chair, a dignified alien named Chancellor Brooks, called the session to order. The room fell silent immediately. Brooks had been leading the council for 40 years and commanded respect from everyone. We are here to address a matter of unprecedented legal and historical significance, Brooks began, his voice carrying through the chamber's acoustics. The progenitor crowns have made a choice for the first time in recorded history. According to the ancient treaties that form the foundation of our galactic law, whoever the crowns choose must be acknowledged as the supreme authority over all territories once held by the progenitor empire. He paused, letting that sink in. Which, according to our best archaeological evidence, includes approximately 70% of known space. 217 member worlds. Trillions of sentient beings. The room erupted in noise. Delegates shouted questions. Some argued with their neighbors. A few looked like they wanted to run for the exits. Bob just sat there, feeling his stomach twist into knots. Brooks called for order, and eventually the chamber quieted down. The law is ancient but unambiguous. It has never been challenged because the crowns have never chosen anyone. Until now. Until Robert Henderson. Ambassador Clark stood up, his face red. With all due respect, Chancellor, this is insane. We're talking about giving absolute power to a human janitor based on some ancient mythology. The crowns could be malfunctioning. They've been dormant for 10,000 years. We can't restructure our entire civilization because some old jewelry lit up. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Bob couldn't blame them. If he was in their position, he'd think this was crazy too. Dr. Morris stood next, and the room quieted to hear her. She'd become something of a celebrity over the last few days, the scientist who'd proven humans were descended from progenitors. The crowns aren't malfunctioning. We've run every test imaginable. They recognized specific genetic markers in Mr. Henderson's DNA that match progenitor samples. This isn't random. This isn't a mistake. The crowns found exactly what they were looking for. Which brings us to the question, Brooks said, looking directly at Bob. Mr. Henderson, do you understand what's being offered to you? Legal authority over most of the known galaxy. Command of military forces numbering in the billions. Control of resources beyond measure. The power to reshape civilization itself. Bob's mouth went dry. He stood up slowly, and the crowns pulsed brighter. Everyone was staring at him, waiting to hear what the janitor would say. "I don't want it," Bob said quietly. The room exploded again. People shouted in disbelief. Someone threw up their hands in exasperation. Ambassador Clark looked relieved and terrified at the same time. "You don't want it?" Brooks repeated, like he couldn't quite believe what he'd heard. "No sir, I don't." Bob's voice got stronger. "I don't want an empire. I don't want to rule anybody. I just want to go back to work." "But the Crowns chose you," General Peterson called out. "The law is clear. You must accept." "See, that's the thing," Bob said, and now he was looking around the chamber, making eye contact with the delegates. "I've been thinking about this a lot over the last few days. Talked to Dr. Morris about the progenitors, about Earth, about why humans ended up on a death world in the first place." He touched the stellar diadem gently. "What if my ancestors didn't disappear? What if they chose to leave? What if they looked at their empire, at all this power and technology and control, and decided it wasn't making them better? Maybe it was making them weaker, softer. Maybe they realized that having everything handed to you isn't the same as earning it." The room had gone completely quiet. Even the Crowns seemed to be listening. So they found the hardest planet they could. A place where nothing was given, where every single day was a fight to survive. Where their kids would have to be strong and smart and adaptable just to make it through. Not because some Crown said they were special, but because they had to be. Bob's voice carried through the chamber now, clear and certain. They gave up all this. The empire, the power, the easy life. They chose to start over from nothing. He looked at Ambassador Clark. "You said if humans were progenitors, we'd have their technology and power. But that's exactly what they didn't want us to have. They wanted us to earn our place. To build our own civilization. To be strong because we had to be, not because we inherited it." Bob turned back to Chancellor Brooks. "My ancestors made a choice 2 million years ago. They walked away from power. And I think I should honor that choice." "You're refusing imperial authority?" Brooks asked, and his expression was unreadable. "I'm saying there's a reason they left. Power like this," Bob gestured at the Crowns, at the vast chamber, at everything they represented, "it changes people. Makes you forget what matters. I've got a daughter back on Earth studying to be a doctor. I've got a mom who needs help with her medical bills. I've got a job that pays enough to take care of them. That's my empire. That's what I'm choosing." He addressed the Crowns directly, feeling slightly ridiculous talking to jewelry but doing it anyway. "You chose me because I've got progenitor blood. I get it. You were doing your job. But I'm choosing to be human instead. I'm choosing to be like my ancestors who walked away. Because maybe the most powerful thing they ever did was giving this up." For a long moment, nothing happened. The chamber held its breath. Then, slowly, the stellar diadem began to rise from Bob's head. It floated up gently, almost sadly, and drifted back toward the vault entrance. The other Crowns followed, one by one, leaving their protective positions and moving in a solemn procession. As each one passed Bob, it pulsed once with light. Not anger. Something else. Something that felt like respect. Like approval. They returned to the vault, settling onto their pedestals with a finality that said they wouldn't be waking up again anytime soon. The vault doors sealed with a deep, resonant tone. A message appeared on every screen in the chamber, in the ancient progenitor script that Dr. Morris had to translate: "Choice acknowledged. Worthiness confirmed. The bloodline may rest." Chancellor Brooks sat down heavily, looking like he'd just witnessed something that would be in history books for the next 1,000 years. Which, to be fair, he probably had. Ambassador Clark stood up uncertainly. "So what happens now?" Bob picked up the janitor's cap he'd brought with him, the one he'd been too nervous to wear during the session. He put it on and felt immediately more comfortable. "Well, I've still got Section 7 to clean. Those relays have been running hot, and if I don't check the air filters, they're going to clog up by next week. So if we're done here, I'd like to get back to work." He started walking toward the exit, and the delegates just watched him go, completely speechless. Dr. Morris caught up with him at the door. "That was incredible," she said quietly. "You just turned down ruling the galaxy." "Wasn't interested in the job," Bob said with a shrug. "Bad hours, too much responsibility, and the commute would be murder." She laughed, and it broke the tension that had filled the chamber. Behind them, the council slowly began talking again, trying to figure out what came next, how to record this in the books, what it all meant. Bob didn't stick around to find out. He had work to do. Over the following weeks, Things slowly returned to normal, or as normal as they could be after the janitor almost became emperor. The Sentinels stopped making jokes about Bob. Some of them started asking him questions, curious about the human way of solving problems. A few even asked him to show them Earth fighting techniques, though Bob had to explain he'd never been in a fight in his life and his martial arts experience was limited to watching action movies. His daughter Katie's tuition mysteriously became easier to pay. Several ambassadors had quietly established scholarship funds for promising human students, and Katie qualified for all of them. She called him one night, confused about where all the money was coming from. Bob just said he'd gotten a raise and changed the subject. The crown vault remained sealed, but sometimes when Bob went in to clean it, the crowns would glow softly. Not choosing. Not demanding. Just acknowledging. A quiet conversation between ancient power and the man who'd walked away from it. Dr. Morris updated her research papers with a new conclusion: the progenitors did not vanish. They chose to become something else. They chose to start over, to build from nothing, to forge strength through struggle rather than inheritance. And perhaps that choice, more than any empire they built, is their true legacy. Bob read her paper during his lunch break and thought it was pretty good, though a bit wordy. He sent her a message saying so, along with a suggestion that she might want to check the grammar in paragraph 7. Late one night, cleaning the observation deck, Bob stood looking out at the stars. Earth was out there somewhere, a tiny blue marble where his ancestors had chosen to restart their civilization. Where they'd given up everything to give their descendants a chance to be something real. He thought about empires and crowns and power. About the choice that had been offered and the choice he'd made. His back hurt from mopping floors all day. His knee ached like it always did. Tomorrow he'd wake up at 5 a.m. and do it all again. And he wouldn't trade it for anything. Because some things, Bob had learned, were more important than empires. Family. Honest work. Choices that meant something because you made them yourself. His ancestors had known that 2 million years ago. Bob figured the least he could do was honor their memory by living it. He finished cleaning the observation deck, turned off the lights, and wheeled his cart toward the storage room. Just another janitor, doing his job, exactly where he wanted to be. The end.